Well, good morning and welcome to Connect to Thrive Mastermind with today's guest, Buddy Thornton. TC squared, tough conversations and tough choices. And that's what Mastermind is all about today with Buddy. During this timely Mastermind, Buddy will guide us in exploring five approaches to conflict that create confusion and hesitation, insights on helping clients and others solve internal conflicts, anticipating conflicts, and aligning response patterns to optimal resolution. Buddy Thornton is a husband with a large extended four-generation family, speaker, author, and coach. His warrior journey has been in Arizona since the late 1980s. As a Vietnam-era veteran, thank you for serving, he has degrees in allied health sciences, human services consulting, and executive leadership. And he's a doctoral candidate pursuing his human services doctorate. Wow, I'm impressed. Never got that far. He also has numerous certifications and actively serves on multiple boards in an advisory capacity. But he is the creative mind behind the Slippery Slope series and the author of books 1 through 4. He's known as the Positive Social Change Agent Pro and has been invited to be a keynote speaker and program presenter, conflict management, parenting, dynamics, and cross-cultural topics. So please join us in welcoming our guest speaker today, Buddy Thornton.
I really appreciate that, Randy, and I really want to note I really appreciate David inviting me to do this mastermind, because this has been, over the years since I developed TC Squared, it has been the most popular presentation I've done for companies in a lot of different venues. I've done this presentation, or a version of this presentation, in Australia, New Zealand, and various Pacific Rim countries, Canada and the United States, and now it's evolved and it's become actually more apropos because of the divisive nature of how society is today. So I really appreciate the platform, and hopefully you guys are going to get a lot out of this. If I'm going to share my screen right quick, and I want to make sure everybody can see it, obviously. Everybody see my screen? Okay. All right. Let's kick that out here. Okay. So basically the topic is TC Squared, but we teach it on a platform that we just opened called Life and Legacy Academy. We're converting all of my courses, and I actually have 31 different courses that I teach, but we're converting them all to online. I was benefited by meeting a learning platform specialist who decided she wanted to partner up with me and manage that part of my business. And I am the owner of BCT Mediations Plus. We do mediation and consulting all over the world, mostly virtually, but I obviously love to do face-to-face work as well. So just wanted to give you guys a little flavor of who I am. And to kick this off, we need to understand that it doesn't matter what the scenario is. A lot of times I find myself in corporate settings, but I've also done this presentation in church settings, in school settings, in community settings, in boys and girls clubs. You know, conflict is constant. It's inevitable, and no matter how much you do to try to mitigate it or prevent it, conflict is going to crop up. The key is, do you have the tools in your tool bag to actually navigate the conversation? And there are some components to that. Conflict is inevitable, but it comes from different sources. And so the most important thing to understand is you have to understand what tough actually means. And a lot of people can't get this in their head. They get one or two components, but they don't put it all together. You have to actually look and understand what happened. You know, were you triggered? Did you do something that actually triggered somebody else and then they triggered you? Did your fear response pop up? You know, there's a lot of different things. What happened? What exactly did happen to cause tough to jump into your environment? And then what does it feel like? Is it making you angry? Is it making you fearful? Is it making you feel like you need to step up? Does it make you engaged? Does it motivate you? And then how do you identify with it? This is every time something crops up, it's a whole new horizon. You're in a different environment. How does it challenge you? How does it challenge your identity? How you respond to it? How are other people going to take you? So all of those things revolve to just one sentence. Every tough conversation starts with yourself. Because if you don't get triggered or you don't feel like it's a tough conversation, you're just going to bypass it and move on. And a lot of times, unfortunately, in today's world, we even see newscasts where people will see something going on, and instead of doing anything or intervening, they pop out their smartphone and start videoing. I mean, how many of you have seen that happen? All the time, right? So it's very difficult to get people to understand that we're a part of a collective. It isn't about observing, it's about interacting. So yes, if you don't get engaged or you do engage, it still all started within yourself. How did you respond to what you have observed or what has happened to you? And that's the three components that you have to be aware of. I find myself a lot of times, because I'm a pro-social agent, I feel like it's important for me to engage in the preventive or the mitigation side. I'm a trained mediator. I pivoted to mediation after I finished my pro career as a professional bowler. And I immediately didn't like the scenario. It's like, wow, I'm entering the fray after everyone's already bloody and laying on the floor. How can I do something to prevent that? So I pivoted to being a coach as opposed to a full-time mediator. And now I do both. That way I can help people in crisis and I can help people avoid crisis. And I think that's a good way to approach life. But we have to also look at the flip side. A tough conversation is only tough because we don't know how to approach it. We fear how we're going to be perceived. We fear how other people are going to respond. We fear that we may correct something now, but there may be bad consequences down the road. There's a lot of different things that make us hesitate. The most important thing to remember is that if you have the tools and you understand how conversation works, you can reduce that fear. Is the danger, that's inevitable. Conflict is inevitable, but fear, that's a choice. You have a choice on how you handle fear. The way I do it is I teach people how to actively listen. I teach them how to take what they've heard and reframe it in their own mind before they respond. The habituation, especially in America, is that people will start formulating a response halfway through a question or halfway through a statement, and they don't even hear the end of the comment, and they're making a response that may be completely and totally inappropriate. So if they take the time to listen all the way to the end and then reframe it in their mind, that actually reduces a lot of conflict, because people will understand, hey, he actually is listening to me. He's engaging with me on a very important level. So wow, he's trying to take the drama out of the room. He's trying to take the air out of the balloon. But then if we reflect on exactly how we should respond to what we see in front of us, and then we start asking questions, which is also part of reframing. Did you really mean to say what you said? Or, did you think that what you did was appropriate? Could you explain to me, what caused you to do that? As opposed to letting the control monster pop out and say, hey, you shouldn't be doing that. You should be saying, maybe there was a reason. Let's get to the bottom of it. Let's get where we need to be before we make a judgment call. I call that co-creating a reality. You're actually showing dignity toward everybody else in the conversation. Okay, it may be a tough conversation. You may have to fire somebody. Let's say it's a one-on-one conversation, and you've always had good performance from this person, but now they've done something, you're going to have to let them go, or you've got a customer complaint, you're going to have to let them go. So you have to go through these steps with yourself, and you have to say, okay, what's the best way for me to approach this so that I come out the other end and I maintain my presence, and I also allow them to maintain their dignity at the same time. I don't know how many of you understand what BATNA and WATNA are, but a BATNA is the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. Let's say you're in a situation where you want someone to stop doing something, but you don't have control over them. That's not the way the world works. You can only try to influence them and ask them to change their behavior, or you can leave. Which is the better alternative? What's going to be the choice you're going to make? It's really going to depend on how much fear you have in how they're going to respond to what you say. That's what increases the toughness of that conversation. WATNA is the willful or worst alternative. If I do this, what is absolutely the worst thing that could occur? And people, especially in a divisive environment like we have right now with the political situation in the country, most people ruminate towards that W, not the B. They don't look for the best alternative. They actually worry about the worst alternative, and they forget that there is a best alternative to any conversation. So trying to get someone to move away from the WATNA back toward the BATNA is extremely important. If you're going to work yourself through a tough conversation, that's where you start. How do I get them to go toward the optimal side of the equation? And what that all wraps up to be is these are all the steps that create perspective taking. What you're actually doing by getting yourself ready to get through this tough conversation is you're just trying to cross all the checkpoints off. You want to make sure that you have the perspective of exactly what's going on, what the other person is doing, what triggered them, and what are the possible consequences. You're creating a perspective that you can understand for yourself so that you can turn around and start making the proper choices, which is the second half of TC squared. Optimal choices come out of defining a purpose for the choice. How many times have you seen something or you've had to interact with something and maybe you've decided that creating a solution is not even an alternative? It's something you can just let go. And your purpose at that point is just to let it go and let somebody else handle it, or maybe it's just so minor you don't need to worry about it. And that brings us to risk assessment. You have to be able to understand what are the risks if I do engage, what are the risks if I don't engage, and what is the risk to the other party if I engage or I don't engage. The scale for risk, obviously, is aversion versus tolerance. How much pain, how much fear can you allow into the room before you have to do something to mitigate that problem? Tolerance is a very, very difficult scenario in a divisive environment. Risk aversion, well, people walk around it all the time. They make that choice more than they should, at least in the modern environment. And we'll get back to that when we get to a little different part of the presentation. But then you have to consider the consequences of what you found in your risk assessment. So I've decided, yes, I need to get engaged. This is something I need to handle because otherwise my business is going to take a hit. My ROI is going to take a hit. I need to be able to make some type of a choice. But then you have to build a framework, project the story. If I make choice one, what are the consequences? What are the possible consequences? Am I going to be creating another problem? I'm going to have to recycle back into this again a week or two down the road. If you can project the story well enough, if you're experienced enough in your environment or with the choice that's in front of you, that's a good thing. If you're not, then you need to maybe reach out to a third party, have them come in and help you. You define that feedback cycle by, am I competent in this area? Am I the expert in the room who can handle this? Do I need to engage someone else in the conversation? And you have to self-define that. That is not something other people should be defining for you. You should have enough self-awareness when you're facing a TC squared environment that you know this is something I can handle or this is something I need to get help with. And you should make that choice almost immediately based on your comfort level and how much you're triggered into your fear response. And whatever you do to make the choice, that all this is all balled up into is called perspective making. When you perspective make, what you're doing is you're trying to, one, create an environment within yourself that makes you comfortable with your response. And then The second half of perspective making is now, can you project your response out to the receivers, the audience in the room, or whoever needs to be engaged in this tough conversation? Can you project exactly what you mean, how you mean it, and what it needs to do, and how it's going to create positive consequences? And that, if you learn to maximize that, those are optimizing your choice dynamics. Does anybody have any questions so far?
Yeah, actually, buddy, I'm glad you paused there because you've obviously covered a lot of information, and this is a mastermind, and it's really important as we go through this. Not only do we ultimately act on what we learn here, but also make sure we're clear. So I'm going to invite anybody at this juncture, if you have any clarifying questions or observations here, go ahead and open your mic, and I will bring you to the stage here to ask Buddy your question or get clarification before we move on. Any questions? I think myself, I would tell you, Buddy, that I think this is critical. I think listening is critical. I also think that, and that's one of the reasons why we want to do this today, is because I like the actual looking at your botna and whatna to determine, where the space is in between. Our zombie brain does default to the worst case scenario to keep us protected from either rejection or whatever. But the reality of it is, worst case is almost guaranteed if you don't engage your frontal lobe and make a conscious warrior decision to move forward. So anybody else have anything? Randy, I saw your mic pop open there for a minute. Did you have a question?
No, I'm still trying to figure out, the only way that I can do anything is to use the mic in the lower left-hand corner, but on the list of attendees, I'm not showing up. My face, my image isn't there. So I was wondering whether or not I can say anything.
No, you're definitely here. Randy, let me set you at ease here. Hold on.
No, I'm not worried, David. That's
you're definitely here. You're definitely here.
Okay.
Let me see. I'll show you. So
I just didn't want to accidentally burst in by playing with the microphone.
There you are. See, Randy, you're right up there. Can you see?
Right up where? No. Hold on.
I don't know.
No, I'm not there.
Well, since you brought it up, David, I'm going to expand on that Batna and Watna just a little bit.
Sure.
From a neurological standpoint, and a lot of people don't like to listen to the science, so I don't really bring it up until someone opens the door. But if your amygdala, which is your oldest rat brain in your head, if it triggers your fear freeze response, it's called fight, flight, freeze, fear response. It's the technical label. If that engages, your prefrontal cortex cannot engage until you calm down your amygdala. And it's a biological process. It's a chemical process. You release all these chemicals in your brain, and now all of a sudden you're looking for something that's going to allow the endorphins to kick back in. The dopamine needs to come back. If you can't get that to happen, you're going to be struggling in that fear response. And
right.
You can see people who are not attuned to getting out of fear. They actually start looking like that deer in the headlights that we all are very familiar with. And when I see somebody who's in that situation, I understand two things. Number one, they are not prepared to handle the danger that is in front of them. Number two, they're too afraid to even ask for help. And that's when the third-party bystander needs to actually jump in. That's the most critical point of TC squared is, should I be that bystander who steps in? If someone is having that kind of a fear response, how can I help them get out of that fear response so that they can return to being in control and making their own choice? We don't want to make the choice for them, but we do want to help them get out of that fear response.
How can you tell they're in the fear response? Facial expressions, lack of speech?
Yeah, most of the time it's hesitated speech, and you can almost see a cross between abject fear, which is the wide-eyed response, like, oh, and the mouth kind of opens up a little bit.
Right.
They take breath in. It's a gas. It's what they call an in-gas, and it may just be a microsecond. It may happen, and then they may slowly start to get under control. But when you see that, and then if it takes them more than 2, 3, 4 seconds to start breaking that down, they're having a problem climbing out of that response, because your chemical responses are very fast. People think that, oh, it takes time, it takes time. No, your body is an amazing machine. It responds, and it can trigger and then untrigger just as fast. It just depends on how well you're attuned to doing that. And when someone's not, you'll know. If someone's sitting there going, oh man, I don't know if I should be here right now, you'll know it. If you look in a group of people, you'll say, oh, this guy, he's a little bit worried about being here.
So it's a really obvious and serious change in personality.
Absolutely. And
okay, thank you.
Usually it's a shrink, and we'll get to another slide. I'll show you what I'm talking about.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, if you know what you're looking for.
Exactly. Okay, so these are conflict artifacts, and you guys are all business owners, or you're past business owners, you're retired, or whatever. But these are the things that we're talking about. We just opened the door, and David, you must have read my mind. But there's 3 different types of conflicts that are triggered. And most of them are very predictable conflicts. Someone does or does not want to do something, or they're envious because they want to do something that someone else is doing. Some are relationship oriented. People believe they
David, Buddy is breaking up.
Stronger response from management or the owner. Oh, I'm sorry. Is that better? Is that a little better?
Talk a full sentence.
Hopefully it is. Okay. So, okay, yeah, oriented. Some people may just not value what they're doing, and if they get pushed to do it more than they want to, that's going to create conflict, and that's usually the area that we see a lot of small business conflict. Is an employee may get hired, but then they may realize, hey, this isn't where I really want to be, and so that's their orientation. But there's a hybrid situation. All of these conflicts are in every conflict. Just depends on which one is the one that's triggered and gets to the top of the heap, is where you have to start. Do we need to fix the relationship? Do we need to fix the culture in the room? Do we need to maybe realign the tasks, and that automatically fixes the culture? There's different ways to approach getting to this conflict resolution domain. But it's always compulsive. Humans are driven by compulsion. We either want to be doing something or we don't. We are pursuing pleasure or we are avoiding pain. There is no other dynamic within your body, within your brain, in your subconscious. You could consciously choose to hurt yourself, but that's something you have to do that overcomes a million years of heredity. We see the compulsion outcomes. Refusal to cooperate. When someone says no, that doesn't have to mean there's a conflict. What it does mean, though, is that there is a problem to resolve. It doesn't have to reach the level of conflict if you jump in quick enough. If someone's minimizing their involvement, then you need to know why. Are they being triggered because they don't want to be there? Is there a value construct that's off? When you've got someone who's giving you maximal output, obviously they're at the lowest level of all those conflict triggers. And that is the only gauge that you can use as an observer, is at what point are they on that continuum? Are they participating in the driving part of the business? Are they engaging properly? Are they doing just as much as they need to do, or are they maximizing their output? From a neurological standpoint, every choice they make is going to be based on self-interest. A lot of times when we're trying to teach professionals in the conflict field, we explain to them that even someone who is 100% altruistic, they're completely a philanthropic type person, they're going to give, but there is still some form of self-interest, even if it's just satisfying their own desire to look good. And they're always going to be seeking the pleasure of that, even if that's their minimum, that they're trying to look good, that's their pleasure point. They're going to do that as much as they can and avoid pain. The danger triggers, we all know, I can't define your danger triggers for you. You would have to define your own danger triggers. But you can and you should decide if you should be afraid of something that is a danger. There are ways to mitigate it. You learn how to mitigate everything. You don't reach your hand and touch a hot stove, right? So if you're not going to touch a hot stove, you're not going to walk out in front of a speeding car. That all circles around to a locus of control. And an internalized, powerful locus of control is how we get from the tough conversation to being able to make an unbiased, unprepared, proper choice. So if I'm a conflict management professional, I'm walking into your business and you tell me you've got a problem here, I'm going to look for all these triggers. I'm going to look for all these clues, but I'm going to start with the locus of control. I'm going to help you gain a sense of control of yourself first, and then of the externals in your environment, because that is how you work through conflict. I don't know how many of you have heard of Thomas Kilmann conflict, but these are the 5 things that I mentioned, or were mentioned in the intro. The conflict in your world can only come from 5 different places, and they can only be handled in 5 different ways. Your responses are: you either compete because you want to win, you want to be on top. You collaborate because you want to fit in, or you want to make sure everything is maximized. You compromise, you avoid, or you accommodate. And all of those, if you lay them out on a very long continuum, which is why I put this reframe side on here, is to spell them out, because Thomas Kilmann doesn't really spell them out in his. Everything has a level of assertiveness. Everything has a level of cooperativeness. If you're trying to assert, you can't cooperate at the same time. It's almost that flip side of the coin. So when you're competing, you're being assertive, but you can't be cooperative. If you're going to compete, and just to say that you're going to be cooperative defeats the point of being competing. Excuse me. That's what we call asymmetric power dynamics. Everyone knows the guy who has to get at the head of the line of cars, that they'll speed to get around you because they want to be in front of everybody. That's the guy who's competing, and he's not going to cooperate. Compromising is really, in our world, almost the worst response, because what you're doing is you're seeking middle ground, and you don't care if you win, but if the other guy starts to win, you get offended. And so you create what we call a lose-lose scenario. The only thing worse than that would obviously be at the bottom. That's avoiding, refusal to engage. We call that the hope strategy. You're refusing to engage, and you're just kind of hoping it goes away, and you hope it resolves itself. And how often in your world does that happen, right? It just doesn't happen. But collaborating, being assertive to a level, but understanding that the other party has a right to be just as assertive, so you cooperate with their attempt to be assertive, creates that cooperative effect, and it makes it a win-win. Accommodating is kind of a compromise between collaborating and competing. You're willing to lose now, but you know your goal is to win later. And businesses can optimize the accommodating role by making sure that they accommodate customer requests, client requests that don't cost them too much money or time, because then it doesn't invert their ROI. So the best case scenario in the Thomas Kilmann conflict scenario is to vacillate or be somewhere between collaborating and accommodating. Avoiding, compromising, and competing are all what we call downhill strategy. You're going to lose more than you're going to win. You may win now by competing. You may win now, but at what cost later on? If you want sustained business, you need to seek to be in that collaborating or that accommodating arena, and then understand where the balancing point is between the two. And before we go any further, anybody have any questions about this?
Again, if you have a question, just open your mic. I can, Ricky or I can see you, and I'll bring you up to the stage. I do have one thing I'd like to inject here is, and I think it's really we have to recognize is when you talk about collaborating versus compromising, and I think most people think, hey, I'm trying to get along, I'm independent, whatever. There's ways that we're encouraged to compromise, and I think you did a good job of explaining why that's probably like the worst place to be. It's kind of like not hot, not cold, not committed. And I think collaboration means you're bringing your point of view and your value to the table in the relationship or the conversation or whatever, right? And so I think that that's why collaborating isn't just not having an opinion. I think a lot of people say, oh, I'm a collaborator. Well, unfortunately, I experience it. They won't tell you when they disagree, and that's not collaboration. So I just.
No, you're absolutely correct, David. Here's the trigger point on it. And if someone ever asks you what the difference is between the compromising and collaborating, it's very simple. When you're compromising, you're actually acting toward the pain scenario. You're doing it because you're trying to avoid a negative. You're not doing it because you want to capture a positive.
Exactly.
When you're collaborating, you're trying to capture as much positive as you possibly can, but you're willing to let the other person capture it at the same time. So it's a mindset. It always revolves back to mindset. If I'm going to compromise, I'm going to feel bad walking out the door. If I'm going to collaborate and I get where I want to be, I'm going to feel thrilled when I walk out the door. But, that's why collaborating and accommodating are so close to each other, because when you're accommodating, it's not a negative trait. A lot of people say, well, I just gave him something for nothing. And I said, what is nothing? Define nothing. You just gave him something that's going to guarantee that he's going to circle back to you 6 months from now or a year from now. And you've built sustainability by being accommodating at very little or no cost. So you have to understand what is the immediate, short-term, and long-term effect of those choices. That's why it's a tough conversation and a tough choice. Because if you can't really understand and you can't vacillate between these optimal choices, you're going to make a lot of mistakes as you move forward. So we're going to summarize that. The 5 essential components of TC squared are obviously that you have to read the room. A lot of people don't get that. But the room starts with introspection. You have to look at yourself and you have to understand, what's my motivation for being here? What's my purpose for being here long term? What do I want to get out of this? And what do I want other people to get out of it so I still feel good walking out of the room? What does that sound like? That sounds like accommodating, but it also sounds like cooperating. Your purpose and consequences drive everything else in this matrix. Your risk assessment has to be from multiple vectors. Is it risky for you? Is it risky for your partners? Is it risky for your stakeholders? Oops, I want to go back. Let's see if I can make it go back here. Can't make it go back. I'll do it this way. Hold on. Let me get back to it. I didn't know my mouse was that sensitive, you guys. I just brushed it and it went. Okay, there we go. When you are risk assessing and you're looking at it, you need your stakeholders to be in your mind, but you also need to understand that there are people outside of that who are what I like to call the community or social stakeholders who could have to reverberate through the choices you make, especially if you're a business owner. You have to always do your perspective taking through active listening. You don't drive perspective taking. You already have a perspective. If you're going to take someone else's perspective, don't you have to hear it and reframe it and consider it and optimize it in your mind before you can make choices? Obviously. That's why perspective making is a story. It is not just a conversation, it is a story. So before I go into this slide, was there any questions at all about what we've covered?
Can you just go back one slide?
Yeah, I don't know how to make this.
Oh, sorry.
No, I can get there. I can get there. Hold on.
Yeah, this will work. At least it's a short slide deck, right?
Somehow my recording turned on. No, I don't want the recording on. I want this slide right here. I'm not even going to turn the presentation back on. Okay, what your goal from making a story is getting everybody to be included in the story. You want everybody to be included in the story so that they feel like they're taking part. Because even an employee, even if it's the lowest employee, will be more cooperative if they believe that what they're doing is intrinsically motivated, if they are the ones who are driving the bus. So you're allowing them to co-create the environment. You may want them to do something a certain way, and you may train them to do it a certain way, but they also have to be self-motivated to follow your instructions, and then you're there to just be a standard bearer. You want to make sure that the standards are met. You don't want to have to be there with a whip and chain to get them to do the work.
No, but what if you're working with a group, let's say 4 or 5 people, and you're working with them, all right? And you're trying. Well, let me just finish the question. You're trying to work the perspective taking through active listening approach. That's what you're really striving for. And there's someone in the room who, I'm going to say, they're not practicing active listening, and the way I would know it is they're not saying anything. They're not raising their hand. In fact, they may even be crossing their arms, and you can see that they're holding this in. How do you recommend you deal with that kind of a situation?
Well, there's 2 ways to do that, but I'll tell you what my optimal way is. Number 1 is to understand that if they're doing avoidance, which is one of the conflict choices,
right? They
have a reason to want to avoid. They have created a conflict. Now, remember, go back to earlier. They may be creating a ghost in the closet. This may be an internal aspect. So the thing you have to do if you're running a group like that is stop, take a few breaths, and then say, Greg, I noticed you haven't participated and you've actually kind of like withdrawn from the group. Could you share what you might have a problem with? Here's the key. You have to make sure there's enough trust in the group that someone who feels like they don't want to engage will open up if they're spot on. When you go through EMT training and you see these EMTs, they come up, someone's been hurt, and it's a big, huge crowd of people, and they want someone to help them. They don't just say, hey, can I have some help here?
Right.
Because that means anybody can have a choice to help or not.
Right.
What they say is, hey, you with the red shirt on, I need you to bend down and grab that. And what they're doing is they're singling them out so that they create a situation where they have to make a choice. They're faced with a tough conversation. What you just described is a classic tough conversation. You've got 5 or 6 people in a roundhouse, and one is just refusing to engage.
Right.
The best way to get them to engage is to prompt them into the engagement. And they may say, well, I don't really like what Joe said, and I didn't really like what Jim said. So, and I don't know if I'm going to be listened to because normally they don't listen to me. And then, it's your job as a moderator to say, we're here to A, make sure all the cards are on the table, and B, that everyone walked out of the room with an equal piece of the pie. So yes, we're not only are we going to listen, but we're going to let you reframe yourself until we understand what you mean. That doesn't mean we agree with you.
Right.
But you have to put that out there. You have to make sure people understand that hearing and understanding is not agreeing. You do not have to agree. There's no written law that says I'm going to agree with anything anybody says, but I will be required as a conflict management professional to make them feel like they have the right to be heard. The worst thing you can do is pull someone's chair out from underneath them. If they're not going to engage and then you just ignore them and let them just sit there, what you just did is you exacerbated their reason to fear. You've basically aligned with them. You've told them, yeah, it's perfectly fine to just ignore what we're doing.
So the sooner the sooner in the session that you identify this, I'm going to call it an attitude, and you try to bring it to the table and get them to open up, the better off everybody is.
Absolutely. The first 3 to 5 minutes of any roundtable that I'm doing, especially in a conflict situation, is I'm reading the room. I'm making sure that I get a feeling for how everybody feels about the conflict. And there's 3 ways you do that. Number 1 is you see the head nod, you see the head shake, or you see the crossed arms. And those are your 3 keys. And if you get any of those, or even just a little hint of those, remember, it can be a micro, might be a micro move. They may start to go somewhere and they go, oh no, I don't want to project that. So you see them rigidly stop. Instead of shaking their head, all of a sudden they're just very still. And you're like, uh-oh, they're in that triggering response. They need now to understand, am I going to go this direction or am I going to go that direction? So they're hovering over a tough choice.
Right.
And by you inviting them into the conversation, you are opening the door to allow them to take the choice that you preferred on the menu. Does that help?
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is that the skill of the leader, okay, is dependent on how soon he or she senses that attitude and then finds a very careful way to invite that person back into the conversation by asking them, you seem to have, there's something bothering you. Could you help me understand that a little bit better, or something along that lines?
And right, and a optimal leader at that point is also going to be exuding empathy.
Right.
I can feel your pain. I can feel that you're hesitating, and I feel like you'll be benefited a lot by joining the conversation. Could you share what is your trigger? What's creating this problem? And let us all help you. It's almost like a group hug without getting out of your chair.
Right. Yeah.
Kind of get the way that works.
Thank you. That was very helpful.
Yeah. The ultimate outcome has to be sustained relationship. I don't tell business owners how to run their businesses, but I do tell them how I run mine so that they can see what kind of a model I strive for and what has worked for me. I have employees who have worked for me. The average is more than 11 years. So you don't keep employees for 11 years on an average unless you are either treating them like they are important to you or they have skills that you can't find somewhere else. I'd like to think that if I'm being good to them, not that they are invaluable. So, the bottom line is, what do they think of me? Am I going to run my business based on that? No, I'm going to run my business to make as much ROI as I can and take care of my clients. But at the same time, it's a lot more important for me to keep those human capital assets in place because it's way expensive to replace them. So I pivot to the side of being a humanistic, relation-driven owner, and anyone I see not doing that is usually the clients that I end up going to try to help with their business. Right. So it's very important that people understand that. Okay. Any questions before I go to the last?
Thank you very much.
Okay. So the last slide that I have is just something that I just wanted to throw out there that we're going to be sharing. I'll be sharing it through David over the next couple of weeks. But everyone can get the copy of my slides if they want them afterwards. Just email me and I will be glad to send you a copy of my slides. But I'm going to be in the Texas area. I live in Phoenix, Arizona, so but I run a nonprofit in Dallas, so I'm there quite often. And we're going to be doing some full-day intensives in the month of November. There's going to be several, and we try to target Saturdays. I know that's kind of an awkward day for some people, but it works for us. Friday nights and Saturdays, that way people still have their Sundays. And these are just an example. One Saturday, we're going to have overcoming the unicorn effect. And in the morning session and in the afternoon, we're going to say why our choices fail. What did we do? What are the 7 reasons that we're having choices that fail over and over again? And those are very predictable based on research. But that's just an example. We're going to be doing several weekends, several Saturdays. But for the people who are in Dave's group, if you use the code BKMM1072022, you would get the special price for the all-day class. of $350 instead of $800. And that does include lunch, and it includes all of the training materials. And there's also bonuses that we give out the day of the program. I try to be as accommodating to business owners as I possibly can be. I believe that I'm only valuable to you if you engage with me. So, anybody who feels like they can benefit from learning how to get through tough conversations and how to make those tough choices, or any of the other classes that I have, which Dave already has a list of, and I can provide anybody a list of my classes. We're here, and I work virtually. I work with, I'm up at 2 o'clock in the morning helping people in Brisbane, Australia. Okay, so there's no reason to not feel like you can call me and say, hey, I got a small problem. I handle really small problems. I handle really giant problems. It just really doesn't matter to me. But we are going to have one special event in November. We're going to have a special celebrity guest. I'm still waiting for the person that I've asked to join. He told me that he wanted to do something before Thanksgiving, so I've invited him. And when I get confirmation from him, then I'll give that information to David, and we'll put out the full press release for the whole thing. But, engage. And we also do what we call community boost camps, where we invite parents to bring their teens to meet different celebrity guests that we bring to the table. And we do family engagement type things, communication, skill building things. And we do those at an extremely low cost point so that we can get as many people in the door as possible. So those all will be coming out. I will be circulating those events through Dave, and if you join my email list, I will be sending you those myself. Anybody have any questions?
So, Buddy, thank you. Let's give Buddy a hand for those here. Buddy, why don't you unshare your screen, and I'll bring up the grid here. And so, Randy, I see your mic's open. Go ahead.
No, it's just open because it's the only way I can communicate it. But see, even in this view, David, for some reason, my image is not coming up. I don't understand. It's the first time it's ever happened. Not that it's a big deal, but it might be.
No, it's got to be on your end. So
could be.
No, it's definitely on your end. We can all see you.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
Interesting.
No, everybody can see you. You've been spotlighted a couple of times.
I guess I better not pick my nose then, huh?
Yeah, do not do that.
Good job, buddy, by the way. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, buddy.
We're leaving room for Q&As. I mean, anybody have any questions? I'm an open book, but if anybody wants to volunteer, just as a sample, if you want to volunteer some type of a tough scenario that you are encountering, or if you want to just generically give me one, we can work our way through it to give you guys an example. I'm more than willing to do that.
I really like the way you spoke about active listening and watching for signs that people are connected or not. That's something I've learned in a lot of other places, but I really appreciated the way you could relate it to the business work environment and working with clients rather than just in normal relationships. It's all just good communication. Listening to answer is the problem that a lot of people have instead of listening to understand.
Exactly. Well, see, here's the thing. This is the way I look at it. If you're going to walk in somewhere and you want something from somebody, it's transactional, especially if it's only a one-time event. But wouldn't you rather have that one-time event be done in a way that if you had to go back in there 3 months later, 3 weeks later, or even 3 minutes later, the person would have a positive spin on who you are and what you might want? So, to me, it's almost like you're constantly engaging with people and trying to create a schema or a mask that presents the proper image. And you just learn to read that. I have had and sold 2 different businesses, and both of them, I never did any marketing. I never spent a penny on marketing. Every client I got was for referrals. And the reason is because I made sure that I have very open and engaging personality to draw people in. And it may work for me, it may not work for other people, but it's important that you learn how to read people if you're going to do that.
Right. I was just sitting here thinking somehow my picture popped up, but I think the golden rule is never be an a-hole. I mean, it's as simple as that in street talk.
Yeah, I expanded the golden rule. You know, it's do unto others as you would prefer they do unto you, regardless of what they do to you.
Right, exactly. Amen.
Hey, Don, why don't you introduce yourself since you weren't on in the beginning? Introduce Buddy to what you do.
Yeah. Nice to meet you, Buddy. I'm Don Huff. I design and illustrate information that communicates, educates, inspires, and entertains. What that looks like is logos and branding, business cards and brochures, websites and social media, and exhibits of all shapes and sizes. So I'm a graphic designer, been at it for a long time. Visual communications is my business. Thank you.
And Don, do you know Ashley Kinney?
I do.
Okay.
We do. We haven't seen each other in a
She's
while.
an excellent photographer.
Yeah, she's definitely more than a photographer. You need to talk to her because if you don't move pretty quickly, I'm going to be working with her on the branding stuff. So, her and I have a 1-to-1, and I'm looking at, I'm moving quickly on some of the things we're going to do with websites and that kind of stuff. So anyway, kind of goading you a little bit there, but
yes, I hear that.
That means there is competition out there.
This is collaboration. We're collaborating. We're
co-opetition.
Co-opetition. Is actually a good synergy partner with us.
Yeah, I know. I knew there wasn't a competition there. I was just busting him. I wanted to ask.
Busted.
Yeah, that's all right. But I love you, brother. So that's all right. If I'm not busting you, then I don't love you. So, Ashley, did you have anything since this is your first mastermind? I think to join us on Friday. So, any thoughts?
It's actually in line with a lot of things that we do and promote, and we're Boy Scouts first, so we kind of go from that perspective. And Stephen Covey's 7 Habits, so not just in life and Boy Scouts and business and collaborations. Those are themes that really go along with everything Buddy was talking about. So it's good that I'm going on the right path, but it's nice to see the bullet points of where the collaboration and accommodation are actually positives that we're doing. So I really like the mastermind. We were talking about the diversity too. I had that come up in a topic in a group I was in the Southwest Dallas area, and half the room sat with white people, half the room sat with Black people, and it was very weird in a group. And I brought up the topic. It was very, very awkward for a minute about why there's so much diversity, and we handled that conversation very, very well, but we had good relationships. And so they made it known that they noticed that everyone was sitting separately and starting to really work on that positive social skill and relationships in business. That's very important for us to all be leaders in. So I'm glad you brought that up today.
Well, there's two things I would like to comment on that. There's 2 ways you can go with that. When I run into a large group and it's a very diverse group, but I see people siloing out, the first thing I do is I bring up silo mentality. I talk about the positives of silo mentality. You're in a silo because you are looking for your comfort zone. You're looking for that pleasure side of the equation. But what you're doing is you're losing out on any opportunity to be curious. You're losing out on any opportunity to engage and understand why you're triggered to want to be in your silo. So what I try to get people to understand is that it only takes about 20 seconds of bravery to break out of your silo and realize that one little difference between you and that other person is totally meaningless. Get to the core and get to the conversation, and then listen to what they have to say. And guess what? Those silos disappeared. The next time you were in that group or you went back to that, I do post assessments. When I go back 3 months later to do a post assessment, all of a sudden the room is completely mixed instead of siloed out. It's like, wow, they must have been listening.
David Gurno, did you? I see your mic's open. Was that, if that's intentional? I'll add you here. Did you have a question or a comment?
Mm, Very good information, and that's what I'll comment on right now.
Let me ask you this. Thanks, David. Any other? I have a question, buddy. How familiar you are with the ladder of inference? Have you heard that term?
Well, I've heard that term, but when I look at developmental psychology, I look at inferential thinking, and it comes in before abstract thinking in a human being. And so you start inferring things based on your reality, not on other people's reality. So when you are trying to infer, the optimal space would be to infer from the other perspective. Does that make sense?
Yeah, except I'm really going at it more or less from an academic or that standpoint, and actually, or the, you know, consult or the therapist speak, and getting into the concept of basically breaking down barriers. In my past, I've those who know me know that I've done large multi-billion-dollar outsourcing, brought large groups of people together, gone through individuals, and we all come to the table with we've climbed our own ladder of what we understand. And the challenge is that you've climbed a ladder, I've climbed a ladder. We get to a point along the ladder where we're each on our ladders, and we depart. We are aligned, but then our alignment starts, for whatever reason, life purpose, our experiences, where we are, all the things you were talking about before. And the practical application of it is really, from my experience anyway, is walking back down that ladder to really finding the fundamentals of where we agree, where we are on the same, we are totally aligned, and then begin to resolve the next steps in our understanding between each other. And I've seen incredible transformations of organizations as well as individuals in that process. Today, you made reference several times to the divisive nature of today. And frankly, I get a little irritated by that, only because to me, that's just an opportunity for people to bring in their own agenda, or say, hey, that if you just surrendered and went my way, everything would be fine. And that's not true. Or and then the other thing is, when you talk about ladders of inference, we all lately, in this world, we get into signaling versus acting, and we have certain things that we do that supposedly signal that we are a certain way, or we're a certain rung on the ladder, or whatever, as opposed to really being present and authentic and doing things. I think that signaling isn't doing. And so when you're getting into conflict resolution, you need to get back to, where are the actions, what are people really doing, and not inferring from a signal that they have a certain belief, or a certain way, right?
Well, here's the thing. We call that virtue signaling. People tend to do that because they tend to be very internally biased. They think that the way they think is the way everybody should think, and unfortunately, that's a human trait. We can't offset that unless we do it consciously. But
Right.
What you're describing for the conflict area is what we like to call the stairwell to the landing with no doors. When two people are in conflict and they start going up the stairwell together, they finally will reach a landing where they A, they can't come back down without help, and B, there are no exits, there's no doors. So now they're trapped in the conflict, and that's when they usually call somebody. Look, I was a professional bowler for 27 years, and I had a coach every day of that 27 years. And I know the value of a coach. Here's the value of a coach. When I don't need him, he can sit right over there on the corner, and I don't have to worry about him. But when I do need him, he's there. So what I tell people is, yeah, you're going to be able to handle 99% of what comes your way, but that 1%, that's when you need a coach. And like you say, you need someone to help you get down off that ladder or off that staircase, because otherwise you're going to be trapped up there with yourself and your biases. And that's really bad. Yes,
Don, did you have something?
I just need to run. I just wanted to thank you very much for your time.
Oh, thanks, Don. Well, thanks for being gracious enough to let us know before you just dropped off. That's great. Have a beautiful day. I look forward to chatting with you later.
I will. Bye. You too.
Any other questions or thoughts? Again, thank you, buddy. It's been great. David Gurno, did you want to open your mic? I see you waved your hand.
Yeah, kind of a question here, and there's from personalities. Each of us have different personalities, but based on the Strength Finders model, how does this correlate with that? Because sometimes, with the strength, sometimes you're not going to get along with everybody. So how does that correlate with what you're offering and what you're talking about?
Well, here, I'll give you the best example I can give you that's actually right now, and it also plays to what David said about he doesn't like hearing about the divisive nature of what we are dealing with today. That the divisive nature is exactly the reason why conflict occurs, because people anchor on their own biases. When you don't get along with somebody, it may be something as simple as there is some aspect of them. Maybe they part their hair a way that makes you have what we call a cognitive dissonance. It bothers you. And subconscious, you may not even know why, but it bothers you. Or they may have an opinion about something that you may be super passionate about that they could care less about. And so those are all things that drive people apart. The commonality is, how much can you set that aside for the benefit of the relationship? If you're not committed to the relationship, if you have no passion for the relationship, then a lot of times I tell people, if there's no passion for the relationship, it's perfectly okay to not engage with that person. You're better not engaging than engaging. But if you value the relationship and you need the relationship for some reason, then what you have to do is you have to internalize, you have to use your powerful internal locus of control to overcome those negatives. Because if something's bothering you or you don't agree with somebody, that doesn't mean you can't interact with them. It just means you have to consciously choose to do that. And, divergence is natural. We used to have a term, everyone here is a little bit older, so I can say this. We used to call identical twins identical. But we know for a fact now, just based on biology, there's no such thing as an identical twin. You could be exact duplicates biologically at conception, but even during gestation and the pregnancy and birth and everything that happens after that, every environmental cue that you take in changes you. So by the time identical quote unquote twins are a year old, they're not the same at all. They're what we call monozygotic twins. They are identical biologically, but they're not the same psychologically. So there's no such thing. Every human is unique. You may like something about somebody, you may not like something about it. I've been married for over 48 years. I love my wife. There's a couple of things about her that drive me crazy. But I set them aside because I love her. She's my wife. You can all identify with that. The bottom line is, how do you approach relationships? Do you accept that you may not like something about somebody and just bury it on the shelf and just keep going? It's up to you to decide what's optimal in your environment.
That's great. Thanks, buddy. I love that. And by the way, I'm glad you introduced that you were a professional bowler, because I was going to out you on that one. So I'm glad you brought it up yourself. I know that, but I think that's kind of cool, because my dad was a amazing bowler, and we actually watched the PBA. And Buddy's actually been on TV a few times. So, and if you didn't hear his episode on Warrior versus Zombie a couple weeks ago, you can go back to our YouTube channel where this will be residing, and then you can also listen to it on any podcast if your platform that you might be wanting to. So that was, I think, episode 92, I'm thinking. So anyway, Zip,